sometimes get questions where the question is a little bit more discreet and our answer is a little bit more obvious to us. And so we thought, well, let's do a bunch of these questions, maybe 5 or 6 of them, that are a little bit more rapid fire, at least the Dear Sugar version of rapid fire.
Right, where we're not going to be going back and forth and discussing and delving deeply. We're each going to deliver one bit of advice and hope that it's helpful.
Right. All right, so let's get started. Here we go. You ready?
Yes.
Dear Sugar, my brother recently saw some texts on our father's phone which indicate he's having an affair, or at least involved in some sexual communication with a woman who is not our mother. I feel like the skin of the world has come off. My father has always been a goofy and slightly distant figure in my world, and I don't want to see him differently. If it were just me, I might forget about this, but my brother found the texts, and he didn't tell either of our parents. He told me. I wish I didn't know. I really wish my brother didn't know. Waiting for my life to fall apart every day is making me sick. What's the mature way to handle this? What's the cowardly way that keeps my life unfucked? Sincerely, Poised.
Ugh, Poised.
Yeah.
This is really such a hard situation, but it's a very common one. I think many people find themselves in this situation where they know something about someone's intimate relationship that they don't want to know. And this is especially difficult because it happens to be your parents, Poised. What I suggest you do is get together with your brother and get out a marker and a big piece of paper and make a list. This has been really helpful for me in my life when I am not sure what to do. And I want you on one side of the paper to write down all of the reasons you would want to tell your father that you're aware of this affair, that you at least read these texts, whatever these text messages come to mean. And it can be everything. It can be that you want to tell him because you know, because you want to punish him in some ways, because you want to make him responsible for this harm that he's doing to your mom and your family. And I want you then on the other side of the paper to make a list of all the reasons that it would be a good idea not to confront your father. And then I think you and your brother should really think about not so much what confronting your father, what impact it's going to have on him or what impact it's going to have on his relationship with your mother, but rather what it means for you in your life.
Yes.
Okay, this is a very painful situation, and you are not responsible for your parents' marriage or your father's infidelity. And I think that you should really search your soul, you and your brother in partnership, because you're in this together.
Yep.
Does it take this burden off of your shoulders if you confront your dad and leave it to him to do with that information what he will? Or does it feel like a burden not to tell your dad?
Yeah.
There's no right way.
I think that's perfect. I would only add a couple of things. You don't want to see your father differently, but you do. Mm-hmm. And that is too late. You can't unsee that. You can't unknow that information. And a lot of what we struggle with as we move through life is having our illusions about powerful figures in our lives, especially parents. Even if they're slightly goofy and slightly distant, they're still gods to us in a certain way. And he has revealed that he is in fact mortal and weak and enacting a betrayal. And there is no mature way to handle this. There's nothing cowardly about deciding that the best thing to do is to not bring this information up, or not now, or not at this moment, right? And that there are many things in life that you cannot control. You cannot control whether this is going to come up in the marriage, whether your mom already might know or it's come up previously. There's just this mysterious realm that you don't know about with your parents' relationship. And now you've been given a sudden terrifying access to at least a little bit of the information, and you have to figure out what to do with that. But it does not make you cowardly if you decide to not bring it up, and there is no mature way to handle a burden of this magnitude. I just hope that you will be self-forgiving as you and your brother move through trying to figure out what to do.
Yes, me too. Good luck, Poised.
Yes.
Here's our next letter. Dear Sugars, a month ago, the person I'd been dating for a year prior abruptly stopped speaking to me. Before dating, we'd been friends for 2 years. I've been through breakups before, nasty ones and cordial ones that make you feel like love will never come again, and ones that make you kind of shrug with acceptance and move on with your life. Now, I don't feel like I've gone through a breakup at all. I feel as though my partner simply went out for milk and never returned. I know through the wonders of social media that he's alive and well. There was no heated discussion, No dramatic event that transpired between us. No warning that he'd suddenly just stop. I was never under the impression that anything was amiss. To the contrary, we were two late 20-somethings in love, and who, from my view, greatly enjoyed each other's company. I've reached out twice and have received no response. I feel cheated, as I was never given the opportunity to defend myself against whatever it was that drove him away. I'm racking my brain trying to justify what in the actual fuck just happened to me. There were no shifts in his behavior, no erratic outbursts, nothing. Everything was normal. Until it wasn't. Sugars, I'm completely devastated. I'm having a hell of a time. I have no idea what to tell myself, not only about the loss of a romantic partner, but someone I regarded as one of my greatest friends. I miss him immensely. How do I make sense of it, Sugars? Best left to wonder.
Oh. I am so bummed on your behalf. This is an utterly bewildering abandonment. And you say, how do I make sense of it? You can't make sense of it. He is behaving in a manner that is sociopathic. And the only thing I can counsel you is to disconnect yourself from this person to the extent that it is humanly possible. I think you have to, and I know this feels like, might feel impossible at the moment, but you have to realize that this is not somebody who's safe in your life. And they're never going to be safe, and you're never going to get the answers that you deserve. And furthermore, you probably didn't do anything that drove him away. What drove him away is that he is a sociopath, or that he allows himself to behave in a manner that is, by your description, completely unacceptable and even inhuman. And that kind of person is a danger, and your job is, once you have gotten past it, not look back. Because there is nothing there that is going to give you a sense of being nourished or understanding or reconciliation. And it is completely his loss. He is going to go through the world with that kind of unhappiness and put it on lots of other people. You're done with that.
Yes, I say yes to every word that you just said, Steve. And honestly, I feel like if I could rewrite this signature left to wonder, it would be the lucky one. I think you dodged a bullet.
Yeah.
I'm sorry that you had to have this experience. There's no explanation for it. It's absolutely not about you. You say in your letter that you keep racking your brain trying to figure out what happened. What happened is you got into a relationship with an emotional abuser.
Right.
And you were his latest victim.
Right.
And what happens next is you get to move beyond that victimhood. This isn't to say that you're not going to have to process your feelings of betrayal and hurt and confusion, but please don't dwell on them. Really.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a man who hurt you on purpose. When we do things like the silent treatment or ghost on people, this is what happened when you ghost somebody, you just disappear. That is a form of mental and emotional abuse. And you don't need this person in your life. You don't need to spend one more minute thinking about why, asking that question why. What you need to do now is spend your mental and emotional energy on moving forward and forming relationships with healthy people.
Yeah. So, Cheryl, the next letter I'm going to read is, in an odd way, I think you'll see a kind of mashup of the first two letters. Dear Sugars, I am one of a few ex-wives who married a sociopath. We are in professions that would have trained us to recognize mental illness, but obviously we didn't spot it and in fact hitched our wagons to a master manipulator. It has taken years for me to heal from the feeling of being unable to trust anyone or myself for fear of getting tangled up with someone implicitly untrustworthy. My question is this. Facebook tells the world that he is hooked up with another woman whom I fear is as vulnerable as his other exes have been. I want to warn her, but realize that this is fraught with danger. First, I am afraid of him and what his retribution could be. I'm afraid to even write this letter. And second, I wonder if she would even listen to a warning. Would I have? If his ex had called me, I had been previously warned about how crazy she was and how she hadn't understood him. And third, isn't this ultimately her road to travel without my intervention? Do I have a duty to warn her, as my friends seem to think? Or are we all destined to travel the road we are on? I really don't want to invite his rage or upset her, but I wrestle with whether my inaction makes me a part of letting another tragedy unfold. What do you think, Sugars? Signed, one of the exes. Yikes.
So awful. I'm sorry you had a relationship with a sociopath, one of the exes. I think that you should trust your instincts on this. And being in a relationship with a sociopath, I don't need to tell you, is so much about not trusting your instincts, or rather finding out your instincts were wrong. So often when we talk about sociopaths, when you use these terms, master manipulator, this is somebody who's very charismatic, who presents one face to the world, at the outset of a relationship, and then another as that relationship deepens.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would say who we need to be concerned about right now is yourself and your own healing. And I, again, probably don't need to tell you that part of healing when you're coming out of a relationship with somebody with a personality disorder is about disconnecting emotionally from that person. What kept you in that relationship was this constant sort of cycle of staying emotionally engaged with that manipulation. And I think that in some ways, by reaching out to this woman who's in the honeymoon phase with this ex of yours, who's very valid point, she's probably not going to believe you, just like you wouldn't have believed another person for many reasons. One, that ex of yours is going to say, like he said about all the other women, that you're crazy. And also this woman he's with is probably really in his thrall right now. So she's not going to listen to you. And all you're going to do is re-engage with this person you need to disengage with. Mm-hmm. You're also going to play right into his hands, because this is a man who very likely loves drama and triangulation and feeling like the powerful manipulator of women's emotional lives, okay? So disengage. And this isn't to say that you shouldn't have concern for these women down the path. I mean, maybe send a little sort of silent message out to the universe wishing them well. And certainly, if you're ever directly asked by anyone who's in relationship with him what your honest take is, I think that that's a different kind of conversation.
Yep.
But I think that seeking out people who this man's involved with would be a really bad idea, because it would be harmful to you.
Mm-hmm. In a sense, your motives are what matter the most here. And I mean by that in enacting this rescue, the fantasy of rescue that you've constructed here, I think the person that you really are trying to rescue is yourself. You're trying to re-experience or reenact the relationship in which you're at least able to rescue the woman in a way that you were not. And that's completely natural and understandable as a psychological motive. But it's also true that, the fact that you even know what's happening to him and that he advertises it on Facebook is part of the problem. As Cheryl has said, you have to completely disengage and recognize that any contact with this person is exactly what he wants. He's still emotionally abusing and advertising that he's with somebody new and hoping, in whatever cavern of his heart is hoping these things, that you and other exes are following that and seeing that. And, I think the other thing you should consider is it's a beautiful thing to have compassion and, sympathy. And I think it's a good, honest question that you're asking. Aren't I, because I have this information, somehow culpable? I think that's a good human impulse. But within the context of your life, you're setting a precedent that you essentially are the person who's responsible for rescuing every single person this guy might be involved with. Mm-hmm. Throw the grenade away from yourself. Unfollow on Facebook. Do not have any further contact, and to the extent that you control it, no other access to information about him and what he's doing. That's not a betrayal of your sister who's involved with him. That's your way of moving forward and protecting yourself.
Last Seen, a new podcast from WBUR and the Boston Globe, investigates the largest unsolved art heist in history.
So about the time that he begins putting the duct tape on, he says, "This is a robbery."
The theft of $500 million worth of art from the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston.
When the FBI says, "We solved it, we know who did it," it's like, no, you don't, because you don't have the paintings.
Subscribe and listen to Last Seen now on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts.
Sponsored by Samuel Adams and ADT Smart Home.
I'm Michelle Goldberg.
I'm Ross Douthat.
And I'm David Leonhardt. We're the hosts of The Argument, a new podcast from the New York Times opinion section. These days, it's more important than ever to listen to people who disagree with you. Maybe they'll teach you something new. Or maybe they'll just teach you how to beat them. So listen to The Argument from the New York Times, Subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you like to listen.
Okay, so onward to a happier relationship.
Yes, hopefully.
Different kind of relationship, though. Dear Sugars, I'm a 49-year-old woman. For the last 10 years, I've been friends with John, a gay man who is 51. We click personality-wise, in our worldviews, and in many of our interests. It feels like a wonderful match in every way, but of course, there is no sex. Within the last year or so, we have talked about living together, separate bedrooms, but sharing a home in every other way. Neither of us have had any romantic partners in years. I'm divorced, and I feel like this companionship we share might be worth committing to. Is this a crazy idea? We both struggle financially. Me, because I was mostly a stay-at-home parent for 20-plus years, so I put aside career ambitions to raise my kids, and it negatively affected my earning potential. Him, because he was a primary caregiver for his quadriplegic son. He now teaches part-time and writes because those are things he loves. But they don't bring in a lot of money. So it would help both of us to share a home, to split the living expenses instead of having separate homes. When we talk about committing to our relationship as a life partnership, it feels much like a marriage to us, and yet no sex. We both have been through some very difficult things in life. And at our ages, we feel like we know a good thing when we see it. And this relationship is a great thing. My question to you is this a crazy idea? Is it enough that we love each other deeply, want to work together to make the world a better place and share our daily lives? Are we giving up on the possibility of a romantic relationship with someone else too soon? Honestly, I can't think of anyone I'd rather partner with than John, and he feels the same way. If I knew of any healthy, happy, gay-straight life partnerships, it might make more sense to me, but I don't. Thanks for the insight you can offer. Sincerely, lots of love, but no sex.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. She asks twice, is this a crazy idea?
All right.
And my response is no. You know, we have all of these, you talk about a lot, Cheryl, these boxes that we check in relationships. And this relationship is checking a lot of great, beautiful boxes. It's a compassionate person. You share your daily lives. You have everything together, except you also mentioned twice sex. And then the question becomes, how important is that to you? And to what extent does having a home with this friend of yours preclude the possibility of, or maybe limit the possibility of getting into a romantic relationship? And I think you have to be honest about the extent to which this commitment might take the place of a romantic sexual relationship. Because after all, being a roommate with somebody and even a good friend with that roommate and sharing the expenses doesn't mean you can't pursue a romantic relationship. But at the same time, if you reach a certain kind of set of habits and contentment and living with a person and being intimate with them emotionally and psychologically in your daily lives, it's true that that might limit the amount of desire and availability and even energy that you devote to seeking out romantic possibility.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. I think that it sounds like a wonderful friendship, a wonderfully supportive relationship. There are also financial reasons that this is a great idea.
Yeah.
The only caution I have, and I wish that this were teased out a bit more in the letter, is she uses this term commitment, and then that what they're committing to as a life partnership does seem to imply that then they would be foregoing romantic and sexual relationships with others. And my question there is, why?
Right.
I would encourage you, lots of love but no sex, to sit down with John and really, map out what that commitment means to each of you. What if somebody does fall in love with someone else? I think that to me, this kind of relationship doesn't seem to preclude one or the other of you or both of you dating somebody, right? I mean, there's no
Sleepovers
reason
allowed.
not to do that. And then, of course, if that dating relationship turned into something more serious, then you revisit the terms of this life partnership. I really don't see a reason. I'm really curious about why there seems to be all of this openness, lots of love but no sex, about creating this kind of relationship, this kind of living situation that you and John would have. And yet, when it comes to sex and romance, you seem to be in a very sort of either-or dichotomy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's a bad idea. That's the only bit of caution I have about this. Now, of course, it sounds to me like neither one of you is very actively seeking a romantic partner. And so I think, if you're not pursuing love, it could also be that years go by that this doesn't even come up. So why not do it? I think you should do it. I think you should always move in the direction of whatever crazy joy, beauty awaits. And there it is right before you.
Awesome. Dear Sugars, I have bipolar disorder and I'm pretty open about it. It's well managed these days, but it's an important part of my identity and something that I continue to put a lot of hard work into. I recently had a grad school professor tell me that I should not mention my disorder to people unless I want it to be, quote, my thing. Basically, unless I'm ready to go all in and be an activist for people with mental health concerns, I should keep quiet. I feel like there has to be somewhere in between, but I'm worried that he's right. I believe that I, as someone with relative stability, who has also lived through some pretty tough times, am well poised to be combating the stigmatization of mental illness, and it's something that I want to do for many reasons. But I'm worried that the stigmatization is so prevalent that it will negatively impact my career and my relationships. The other thing that is challenging on a more personal level is that I am self-conscious about defining myself on the basis of a disorder. It is part of me. It has impacted my life significantly. And I want to be happy and grow and exist beyond it. So I'm struggling with what to do. What would you do, Sugars? Signed, Somewhere in Between.
What I would do somewhere in between is live in that place where you seem to be authentically living, which is somewhere in between.
Right.
Where you have bipolar disorder, but it isn't the thing that defines you. It's part of you. And, I disagree with your professor, and I wonder if there was even a kind of misunderstanding in that conversation, because certainly we're all kinds of things without going, quote unquote, all in. Just because you have this condition, this experience, doesn't mean that you have to be on the front lines of activism. Neither does it mean that it has to be this deep, dark secret. That you can allow things to sort of sit firmly, but well placed in your life, that it's one piece of who you are. And I think that the more you play with that and experiment with that and get comfortable with saying in inappropriate moments when you feel moved to talk about your experience, that can be a really powerful way for you to step forward, and then other times step back.
Right.
Not everyone has to know your private health business.
Right.
I talk openly about many kind of taboo subjects that, I'll say, I'm a sexual abuse survivor, but I don't always say that.
Right.
And I think so much about being an evolved, authentic person has to do with knowing that all of those pieces that make us, they belong to us. And so that we get to be vocal about them when we feel moved to be, and we get to be silent about them when we feel moved to be.
Right.
And that's perfectly okay.
Right. You get to make the decision. The great thing about the self-definition is you can be who you want in whatever context you want. And I know your professor's probably very well-meaning and has your best interests at heart. But for him to say you have to keep quiet about it is not taking into account that the story that you're going to want to tell about yourself is different based on the context you're in. When you go to a conference, for whatever academic pursuit you have, you might not want to have to identify yourself and walk around as the guy who's doing really great with bipolar disorder. You might want to be the great academic who's presenting a fascinating, interesting paper. And you might be in certain relationships, casual friendships, where it's just not an issue. And there might be other relationships, deeper relationships, in which, of course, it's an issue. And of course, it's something that you want to speak to. And maybe even some people who need to hear a little something about what bipolar is, who might have really bad ideas in their head. And I think this is what your professor was getting at, is if you do identify yourself, you, to some extent, lose control of the narrative. You are suddenly subject to people's judgments about you, whether they're accurate or not. And you alone are not necessarily going to be able to correct their misperceptions. You have to realize that.
I know I'm breaking the rules here by responding to that, but I think we're constantly losing control of the narrative. I think
Right.
if you walk into a room wearing a motorcycle jacket versus a tweed blazer, people in the room look at you and they have a story about you.
Right.
I mean, we do it all the time. I was recently in New York City, and I one of my favorite things to do, I know I'm not alone in this, is to ride the subway in New York City. And it's because it's like the best place to watch people really maybe in the world. And what I do is I'm sitting there and as I sit around, I make stories about everyone based on what they look like. So remember that too when you think about whenever you reveal any bit of yourself, You can't control what other people make of it. And you can't even always guess what other people make of it. Somewhere in between, some people are not going to experience your bipolar disorder as a stigma. They're going to maybe think, oh, my sister has bipolar, or I also have bipolar, or they're going to feel that it might be a positive response. And I want to note that as well.
And when and if you make that decision, that's great, but it should be your decision that you're making for your reasons, because it's something that's nourishing and helpful for you. You have that opportunity, and you seem very much in control of the story you want to tell and who you want to tell it to. I trust that you'll make those decisions if you listen to yourself.
Good luck.
Yeah, good luck.
Okay, onward we go. This is a short one. It's the last one. And we're going to go out with a deep effort at radical brevity. Dear Sugar, what do I do if I can't stand to stay with him, but I can't stand to leave him either? Signed, Can't Win.
Find a place nearby, preferably with rent control.
Leave.
Interesting. I have to ask.
Here's why. Because Can't Win knows what it's like to be with him. And he or she knows that he or she can't stand it. Okay, so that's information that's already been gathered. And we also know that it's often hard to leave people, right? That can't stand to leave him is often a very temporary state of longing and connection and a fear of what's ahead. What if I leave him and it's a mistake? And so I think that you're almost always the safer bet in this circumstance. If you really can't stand to be with him, that tells you something. And the information you don't have is once you get through that little period of feeling like,
Yes.
I'm scared to leave, and then what else is out there?
I hear you, and I agree. If we accept that the temporary state is, I can't stand to leave him. What if the temporary state is, I can't stand to stay with him?
Well, that's the beautiful thing. Life will tell this person that story.
But wouldn't it be nice to have a place nearby with rent control?
Well, yeah. And a place nearby with rent control is leaving.
Yes, that's right, it is. It is leaving. So we agree in the end. I think what you're suggesting is putting an emphasis on she can't quite bring herself to cut the cord. And what I'm saying is, wow, if you feel so profoundly ambivalent about this, then give it some space, but don't entirely cut the cord, but move out. Stay nearby in a way that's on your terms and see which prevails, which was the temporary state and which was really the deeper underlying desire. So,
well, yes, except if that nearby apartment isn't really leaving, then I think that that's not what I'm saying. I really think that this person should have the experience of deciding to end this relationship. And the deal about life is you can almost always you can go back and say, you know what, I was wrong. I want to try this again, even though I can't stand you. But guess what? Most people,
Yes.
I think, and in my own life, this is true. And I what I've sort of observed and gleaned from friends and from the people who write us letters and people who would write me letters when I was writing the column is, and again, not always. There's a big asterisk next to this. And I know people have left each other and then they've come back together. I think that's true and beautiful. But what I mean to say is, if that's what this couple is meant to do, that will be revealed.
Right.
But only after the leaving has taken place. Because the leaving is an indication that the leaving needs to be done.
Yeah.
I think that longing to leave tells us that things aren't really right here. And something else needs to be revealed in this person's life, whether it be within the context of this particular relationship or simply the letter writer's life. See, we are not being concise at all.
No, but I think if I turn it over, yeah, probably. But I don't know, it's just one sentence. We don't know. Was she in a fight? Part of me wants to say, well, maybe she shouldn't be bailing out. Maybe
But why
you
do you
should
say
talk
it's a she? We
or
don't
he?
know that.
Yes, that's right. The gender-neutral person. Another part of us, if we had a longer letter, would say, well, maybe you should stick around and tell this person that you're sometimes so furious with him that you don't want to be with him, and it's making you want to leave. And how does he feel about that? Maybe this is bailing out when she should be having a deep, dark conversation with him. We just don't know.
I'm going to say two more things concisely. One is we don't know. So Can't Win. If you want to write to us at dearsugarradio@gmail.com
Right.
and tell us more,
Right.
including your gender,
Yes.
please do that. And two, we probably won't get to answer that question because I think we've just lost our job. because our Lisa Tobin, our
Right.
producer,
Yes.
is making that sign
All right.
where she's cutting her
We gotta
neck
stop.
because
Rapid
we
fire.
failed
It's
at
over.
concision.
We failed.
We failed at the rapid fire experiment.
Empathy
because we are
ate
blabbermouths.
brevity.
We
Yep.
are verbose.
We failed on the final. We were doing so well, and
I
then
know.
we flunked the final.
But we did pretty dang well. Actually, I think that was really fun. I'll be curious to know what our listeners think of this approach because we
Yeah.
usually, as you know, we delve into these letters at length. What did you think of this rapid fire business? Should we
Yes.
do it again?
Yes, send
We
us.
need your feedback.
Right, feedback and even a rapid fire letter. Although, be warned, if it is a single sentence, it'll just like short circuit our brevity.
Here's the deal. If it's short,